Okay, it says preparing to live stream. So if we're actually live, this is going to be really funny.
It says we're actually live, so it sounds
Yeah, I guess we're actually live. Hello, everybody. Melissa Simonson here, and this is my first time actually trying to stream live on YouTube, so you can see how well that goes. To live stream. Oh no! If we're actually,
you might be able to tell. So hopefully the technical problems you can work with us on.
I really hope so. I appreciate you guys supporting this endeavor as we endeavor to figure out the technical difficulties. We had, actually, Dennis, when I first was doing Facebook Lives on Facebook, obviously, then I didn't know how to do those either. And there were some weird rules where you had to be on your phone to have someone else in the video or something like that. So I was trying to figure this out. And so I would just be sitting there live on Facebook, like, don't look, anybody, go away. Don't look. I'm just trying this out. So.
Well, you came a long way on that one. So I'm sure that we'll come leaps and bounds on this one.
Indeed. And hopefully this will be the only time we have to have some technical difficulties. So, all right, guys, we're going to jump right into it. I'm really excited to show you my brother. This is Dennis Simonson, and he has so many qualifications. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about that. But I want to introduce him because we're going to start a series where we talk to you guys about managing your team and having really good leadership and management habits that you're creating for yourself and for your team. And so that you can really propel your business and get things streamlined. Dennis, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. It's something that's really near and dear to me. I feel like it's something I had to struggle to find. It's something that feels elusive. When you don't know what you're looking for to define how to manage your people and your own day, sometimes that can be a recipe for disaster. And so hopefully, I've got 5 tips that we're going to go over, and I think they can really help out. As Melissa indicated, some of my background, at the peak, I managed about 60 people in a remote office in the Philippines, running a call center with an additional 20 in the US. So as you might imagine, there can be some communication issues, both because they're in a virtual location and because that many people is a lot of personalities and it's a lot of responsibilities that at the end of the day, I'm responsible for, and that you have to figure out how that's all going to work within a larger company as a whole, because I, of course, had to report to specific people and achieve certain metrics. But the problem was none of that was defined. By and large, I was at the time doing customer service, claims, and sales. Actually, at the time where we included sales, it must have been 90 plus people in the office. Anyway, so
wow, that's a lot.
I've done some of it. Yeah, I've done some of this, and it was a startup. So, I think a lot of people can relate to that. I also run my own small business, so I've really stepped in a lot of the same issues that people have, and I've solved many of them. And people would be surprised that it can be pretty formulaic. So yeah, I believe that using these 5 tools, you can actually go in and define anything that's haunting your business, and it should help you focus on the best way to get to the next step, so that you can solve the next problem on the list, which is never ending, especially if you're really good at it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So guys, just to give you a little bit more background here, just from what I know about Dennis, it's hard, by the way, when you're on an interview, it's hard to not feel like you're sort of humble bragging. So I'm going to just humble brag a little bit for my own benefit for Dennis. That company that he talked about that he was doing a call center for, that was actually an e-commerce business selling flooring and stuff like that. So that really, down our alley for e-commerce. And also he is an Amazon seller, a successful Amazon seller that has an amazing product, and he's getting ready to launch in the EU. So congratulations on that, Dennis.
Thank
you. For everyone, this is not the only management experience that he has either. He also worked for another seller for a time, managing that staff. So he's got a lot of really amazing tactics that you can use with yourself, by the way, with your team. And I'm really excited to get this series going. So I'm not going to talk for too much longer. I'm going to let him do most of the talking. But what I find as an entrepreneur and as someone who runs a team and tries to, start something from nothing. That's always been a talent that I've had, is I could start something out of nothing and make it go. But at a certain point, you have to systematize that, because if you don't, then it overwhelms you. And I had that experience with my very first business, where it just kind of overtook me. And I don't want that to happen to any of you guys. And there really is a system that can help you manage that and prevent that from happening. So Dennis, we're going to talk about the 5 keys to taking control of your time and creating an efficient team. So do you want to start with the very first one, defining your daily tasks?
I do. It's as simple as it sounds. It's very difficult for an entrepreneur, though, because you tend to be besieged with either a phone call or the daily fire du jour, whatever that might be, or just running your team, and then they're all maybe waiting outside of your office or via email or however it is that you communicate with them. They're all waiting to ask you a bunch of questions because they don't know the answer to those, and they feel like you're the only one that can give it to them. So believe it or not, all of that stuff stems from not really having a defined daily task list. And that goes for both you as the manager, maybe. I mean, I can't read into everybody's mind, but then also passes on to the team. So if each one of your team members has a defined list of daily tasks, it really provides definition to what it is they're supposed to be getting done on a daily basis, and should keep their questions within a daily arena. It does a lot of things beyond that, but that's the core part for your people. The second thing that it does for you is that, again, this is your priority list. These are the things that you have to do constantly and consistently. Like, this shouldn't be like, well, today I need to do this and tomorrow I'm going to do that. Those things always pop up, and there's ways to deal with those in the future as well. But the first thing you want to do is say, hey, you know what? My business or my department is successful when I do these things daily. And you find what those are and you put them down and you make sure, hey, these are my focus, and this is my focus for my individual team members based on what it is that they're supposed to do on a daily basis. And again, I think it's important to phrase it, my department, my business is successful when I do these daily activities, right? And that's I think where you need to start.
So that comes back to a little bit of what we talked about before this, guys, about defining what success looks like, right?
Yeah. So before you can actually figure out what your daily task list is, you actually do need to define what does success look like.
Yeah.
So the reason why I have define your daily tasks up front is because this is going to help your thinking for the second one. And I imagine that everybody's not just thinking, hey, I'm going to start a business now and I'm going to get all this created and think about all this in advance. Instead, it's more like probably organic growth. So you're probably already managing a team who are doing things right now. This is why you go first with define your daily task, because you're probably already in it. You're probably already doing it. So let's go through and say, well, what are we doing on a daily basis, right? Yeah. Figure those things out. And then you define, what does success look like? And I mean that as a department, as a business, and then by position. So by each individual person, you need to then look into it and say, this person is in charge of customer service, or they handle my customer service for me. What does success look like for this position, right? So it's responding in a timely fashion to any kind of incoming customer queries via phone call, email, however it is that you interact with those. Checking reviews, possibly doing again, whatever these things are that your individual business has set for them, and how well they do it. Does that mean maintaining a star average? How do they control that? What is it? Success probably looks like 5 stars, not 1 star. Lots of different ways to go about it, but really for customer service is defined as probably good customer service. Now there can be a situation where it's not bad customer service looks like success, but it can be something like, hey, we don't provide, world-class service. We sell a product with a very slim margin. And so success looks like as little interaction as possible while still maintaining adequate customer service or decent customer service. And that could be like, oh, well, you only reach out via email. We respond first via templates, things like that you can actually plan around and have done. And it will help you to pursue that goal of automation or auto responding rather than individualized care with a higher end product. So success can look different even for customer service, in my opinion. And this is why you need to go in by individual activity, individual activity, and really make sure that you've got success defined on a per person basis. I'm sorry about the phone call.
It happens. So, okay, interesting. So it sounds like some of these keys. So the first key being define your daily tasks. And then the second key being define what success looks like, define success. Those each sort of tend to elaborate themselves. It gives you a way to start and it gives you the next step without you actually having to know what that is. It kind of helps you discover it on your own, right?
Yeah. So I think when you've asked those 2 questions, you should be able to sit back then and say, oh, wait a minute. Some of these daily activities don't actually match up with what makes my business most successful or my department or my people most successful. And when you have that, this is a time for you to reevaluate and say, hey, you know what? This may not be on my daily task list. This maybe should be on one of my customer service teams or my sales team or whatever it is. This may belong on somebody else's desk. This may not belong on anyone's desk yet, right? It may be that you're a little too ambitious or not ambitious enough with the daily tasks that your people have set.
With delegation, would you say? Or
both with delegation and with just priorities. Examining priorities in a young, growing business is critical because as you knock out one project after another, your daily needs and your company's daily needs change. And so you need to be agile enough to keep up with that. And that can be a big time sink for people when they're still doing the same task lists that they were doing 6 months ago, when in fact they've completed 3 or 4 projects that have had an impact on all of those things. I've seen a lot of young and growing businesses start to do processes and procedures, and I love it because it's critical to this process as well. But when you've done that now, if you've gone through and you've defined a process that was difficult before, but now has written instruction to go along with it, you can pass off that task to maybe somebody less capable so that you can go in and define something new so that you can again pass that on to other people later on. And it's kind of a recurring thing. And as you go through and you define what the success is, you show what it looks like on paper in a repeatable process, and then you add that to somebody's daily task list and maybe in replacement of something else, maybe not, maybe it's in addition to their daily duties, but it causes you to look critically at what's being done and how efficiently it's being done on a daily basis. It also insulates you. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have looked at this thing like, I had my employee number 1, they are so good, but now they're moving on, they're doing something else, and I'm really scared or I'm really upset because they really knew everything about my business. They were so helpful, and now I'm a little at a loss.
Yeah.
By doing these things, you actually have created the procedure to hire new people on and help them get acclimated very quickly, because you don't have to sit over their shoulder. You can actually have, hey, here's a list of things to accomplish, and here's how you do it. And that's how you do it successfully. All of a sudden, it's a very powerful training tool.
Yeah, that's incredible. Because, this is something actually that Steve talks about a lot is, people, sorry about that. People often, especially in e-commerce, they're hiring freelancers and they're treating them like they're disposable. They didn't do well enough, they're gone. Yeah. Instead of using them as a team member or hiring them as a team member, and then, cultivating, what your company culture is and what you expect from them and stuff like that. And I think that that's really important. We don't want our workplace where, even if we're all telecommuting, we don't want that to look like, social media where everyone's like there and also not there. Nothing is intimate or personal anymore. We want that to still be a company culture. So anyway, that's an interesting point that you touched on.
Yeah, I think that it's an important point. It's kind of robbing yourself a little bit. It's by taking the shortcut there of just saying, you know what, I hired this person to do this thing, I'm just going to leave it in their court and we'll see what happens. It's taking your own power away to judge it properly and to see how well they're executing the task. Just because you've outsourced this thing doesn't mean that this person has enough attention, enough time. Maybe it's a marketing team and they're splitting your account with 17 other accounts. Maybe you're not getting the attention you deserve. Or if it's an individual employee, maybe they don't know how you expect it to be done. And so then there's a gap between this understanding. So by taking the easy way out and saying, oh, I'm just going to hire that out and I'm not going to try to understand it any deeper, it prevents you from being able to have an easy possible replacement model. And it also prevents you from having an intelligent conversation, I think, with that service provider about what it is that they're going to do, how it's going to be different from the way you were doing it. And again, what does success look like? If it's just, achieving the same result as before, is that okay? And if so, how are you doing it and how are you going to communicate that? So if you're not trying to define what it is that they're doing, even though you're outsourcing it, it's still, I think, going to come home to roost a little bit later on when and if you have to change that service provider, or when and if you're deciding whether or not to continue to pay that service provider.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm actually, for this topic, I think this is going to be a great one to go into on another one, because I think it plays to some things that are pretty common in entrepreneurs, common personality types that you see. Like, I think that entrepreneurs like to put out fires, right? I think they let it get a little bit too hot before they put out the fire, because it feels good to come in and like save the day and nobody else could do it, but I could do it. And that feels great. But I think that there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. And so I think we should definitely revisit that topic on a future part of this series. So, okay. So guys, we're going to head to our next one. If you feel like you sufficiently successfully defined how to define success.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of, it's a thought process. And if I'm getting the people to think about that's good. And I think that once you begin trying to do these, then questions can arise. Yeah. But I think that we have spent enough time on that. We can probably move forward. And like I said, if it'll make a large impact if they're just simply asking those questions and then trying to work through that process, all of a sudden, I think there's going to be a lot of revelations for a lot of people.
I think what would be great, actually, because defining success it really is like a whole show on its own. So I think, really
but before you can go super deep into it, you really have to understand why you're asking the question and to what part of the business you're going to define, because that question can be macro applied to the entire business, or it can be applied to just some individual's activities or a project. And so you're right, because defining it and coming out with metrics to measure it and to hold employees accountable to. Those are all parts of this subject.
Yeah, I say we schedule another one to dive deep into that, because I think we could just define success for you as the entrepreneur that's kind of trying to run things, but then you could break that down too and say, not only what does it look like for me, but what does it look like for me as a manager of my team, and what does it look for me like as the the doer of the tasks that I'm trying to accomplish.
I love it.
and then for each of your team members, and it could be how they interact with each other, or how they communicate, telecommute, or how they perform their tasks. So I think we can really dive in deep, and I think that that's really a big help to maybe some of these listeners. Is that's it's really hard. It's hard to define success, because you have to just think about something that you don't know. If the word define is in it, like I struggle with this one. I struggle with defining success, because
it is very complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, just to go a little further into some of those things, one of the ways that was very difficult for me early in my career was when I was managing the claims team.
Yeah.
And it was for flooring goods that were shipped across the United States. So this is, 1 ton or more, well, sometimes less, but it can be more than 1 ton worth of material shipping across the US. So it can get freight damage. It can have defects from the factory, and it can have installers installing it incorrectly. So on that level, I've got a few different outcomes that are all very expensive, and that the customer doesn't rightly think that are their fault. And yet there would be 3 different people to blame or 4 on that one. And so you have to figure out how do you resolve that for somebody. And you have to go in and measure each individual aspect. It takes longer to do one than another. The bottom line is, with a complicated situation like that, you go in, you define how long it takes for each one of those claim types. You define what classifies each claim type differently, which was done. And then ultimately, you figure out what the best resolution is for each one of those processes. And of course, that took time and knowledge to understand. But the process that we went through, we didn't get it right the first time, but we learned each iteration of the metrics that we used, and it delivers to you then a final product where we actually were able to define each one of those things differently. We're able to gain power to pursue our claims and solve them faster than anybody in the industry. And it was a truly amazing process. Once we were done with it, it was critical to our success. And it begins with asking those questions.
Asking questions. Oh, that's so good. Dennis has told me this before, guys. This is why I'm like shaking my fist at him right now, because I'm like, hey, Dennis. And by the way, just for another just tidbit for you guys, background, Dennis and I used to work out every morning together when he lived in the same area as me. And so I would come to him while we're on the treadmill, and I'm like, hey, Dennis, this happened. How would you handle it? And he has like the most eloquent and brilliant answer. And I'm like, obviously, now that you say it out loud, obviously that's the right answer. It just is, it fits so perfect, and it seems so obvious once you hear it. But it can be very difficult to think of these things, because you can get lost in the problem and not know where to look for the solution. So, all right, Dennis, for the next bit, you said that the third key to taking control of your time and creating an efficient team is to commit to service level agreements. So what do you mean by that?
It's essentially, you've gone now through your daily tasks, and you've just determined what success looks like. So at this point, you're basically saying, well, I know that a good salesperson or a good web page will convert 5% of the customers, or on Amazon, maybe it's 15 to 30%, depending on your product category. So that's what success looks like. How do you achieve that? And by asking that question, you start to say, well, you know what? You get the good quality images up there. That's one constant presence in a successfully converting a web page, right? So, okay, that's number one. When is that going to happen? And how often do we update it? And is there any specifics? Do we need to have multiple sizings for different ad types and for different, to keep up with Amazon's requirements for their photos as well? How many places are you going to use those? Are you going to use them in ads? Are you going to use them on Imager and Facebook? Because perhaps you need different, white background. Maybe you need different sizings. Maybe you need all of these different things. When are those things going to happen? Who's in charge of doing it? Those are the basic questions in a customer service or in a service level agreement. And when I'm saying service level agreement, I'm talking about interdepartmental or even interpersonal.
So let me jump in just for a quick second. This, I think, if I'm understanding you right, and I want to just see if the people listening have the same understanding as me.
Sure.
This is when somebody comes to you on your team and says, I didn't know I was in charge of that, or that's so-and-so's task, or why would I know how to do that?
It's similar to that. It's more for basically saying, hey, when I receive an email from somebody on my team, I will respond to them within 2 hours. Unless I've committed to you, like, hey, I'm going to be out of town, or, there's some other circumstance. But basically, as a company or as a department or as a team, we're going to commit to responding to each other via Slack, via Instant Messenger, via email within this time frame.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead, Dennis.
I was just going to say, what this does for you, it seems like, why would I do that? How am I possibly going to keep up with that? But the fact of the matter is, by doing that, you ensure that people don't feel like they have to ambush you with a phone call, wait outside of your office, or just constantly harangue you one way or the other. And it actually turns down what I call the churn, which is essentially duplicate requests from the same people over and over with the same problem, because they're not sure when you're going to respond to them, when they're going to be able to get back to you. And it also prevents you then from having to follow up with your team. Hey, remember when we talked about this? Where is that at? What are we doing with that? Where's the process on this?
Yeah. So that's really time consuming to, one, have to track what you've already told your team to do, right? That's, I don't want to think about it. After I've given that to somebody, I want them to do the thing and then come
back. Why it's been delegated, right? But you do need to chase it down. And how do you go about that, right?
Right. And then also, I think, like, I had one manager that I remember very well who he had some things in his mind that meant you were a good employee. He didn't share those with anybody.
Yeah. What does success look like? I don't know.
Yeah. He had an idea, but he didn't let us know what it was. Right. And so, something that would be like that, like if he had in his mind, you respond within 2 hours to an email. If the person who needs to perform that action doesn't know it, and you keep thinking to yourself, man, they just really don't know what they're doing, and you get yourself into kind of a frenzy, and this person can feel totally ambushed, thinking that they're doing a great job and have no idea that this idea that you've created about, the way to conduct business is even that they don't even know that that's even happening on the sidelines.
That's right. It's it can, like you said, it can ambush somebody. That's why you try to figure out what does the success look like. And then again, once you've talked about it, this committing to service level agreements is about more about the processes that come about as a result of defining your daily tasks. So if you have a daily task of, I'm going to respond to all of my emails, it could be like, hey, I respond to my emails. So you're letting your team know, I'm going to respond to my emails first thing in the morning. So for the first 30 minutes, 1 hour, I'm going to be responding to your emails. So you know that at the end of the day, you're going to send in this email, but you're going to have a response by your manager the next day.
Yeah.
And so as an employee, that empowers you to be like, okay, well, I don't have to press them for an answer right now because this isn't important enough. I don't have to have it done before I leave the day. So I know when they're going to answer those things. Having that kind of a firm commitment gives them an understanding of when they will achieve this answer. And so then they can make a decision based on the importance level or the urgency level of whether or not this is something that can wait. And the service level, again, if it's for different activities, should have a different service level. I strongly favor a very fast turnaround time for communication methods. And again, in a quantifiable metric, it shouldn't just be loosely defined, because if your culture is not going to identify with the service level that you've agreed to, it's not going to work. You really do have to commit to it. And then again, it can be, we respond to customer requests within 30 minutes or less. It could depend on the metric. It could be we're going to hit them with an automated response mechanism first, and then within this time frame, and we're going to include that time frame on that email. Then we're going to respond back to them with a personal response. It's starting to, it tells people what to expect from you and your company. And it starts with defining that for your own daily tasks and within your team. And you'll find that it helps you to think analytically then also about how to do it with a customer facing or even vendor facing agreements, because that also is a powerful tool. It seems very simple, but if you tell your team, hey, you're responsible for keeping track of the marketing team and going through their expenditures and modifying the keyword listing. So you're going to need to reach out to them, and you're going to, take a look at those metrics on a 2 times a week basis. And then if you don't hear from the marketing team at least once a week and discuss whether or not new keywords should be added or the bids should be changed, whatever it is, you need to define those. And again, that's then creating a habit. It's creating a format of how you can better understand that activity and the relationship that you have with the vendor. Those things are really, really important. And again, it seems like upfront the investment is going to be too much, but right. What you find is that it actually gives you your time back, because people understand they don't need to reach out to you 16 times. They know when you're going to get there. And then when you hear from somebody outside of those hours, all of a sudden, hey, this is probably not business as usual. I probably need to take a look at this. You start to take a little bit of control back.
Yeah, I actually was going to mention that, because it can feel overwhelming, or like there's so much work to do up front, and man, I already have enough stuff to do. I'm running a whole business here, and I'm doing all of their jobs too, because they're, not helping me. But if you are doing these things, then at a certain point, instead of putting out fires, there's no fires being created. And I think that's a really... Well,
the fires are created, but they're handled in a systemic manner, because they understand, hey, I don't have to panic. I'm going to have FaceTime with them at this point in time. I know their access level to me, so I don't have to worry about what's going to happen. Or I know that I'm going to be meeting with these guys, so I don't need to panic and call them up. And it starts to form a kind of a leveling mechanism where you get to look at the business through a less biased lens, right? Where you get to look at these things and say, oh, okay, wait a minute. I know I'm going to talk to them here, and we've already talked about what we expect from that. And so we know we're not hitting those metrics. Let's go ahead and discuss this and figure out how we're going to adjust this to move forward. And you now have a common point of conversation with your employee or with your vendor. And if they're not living up to that expectation, it's gonna be like, hey, we have an agreed upon service level. Mm-hmm. When I send you an email and you don't comply, now you've got, in my case, I would do write-ups, et cetera, but that's how you begin to understand how well somebody's accomplishing a task that's been set to them. Because if they can't live up to a service level that you've both agreed on, there's the beginning of an issue.
Yeah. It's really good to know, because Otherwise, again, you have something in your head that you've decided, and we all have a little bit of that bad manager in us, by the way, the one that I was describing. Sure. We all have a little bit where we have an expectation, like, this is just how it's always been. This is what I know. This is how good people do things. And somebody that you just hired may have no idea of your quirks or whatever upbringing you had or your management styles that you've been exposed to previously. So they may have no idea what good looks like to you. And if you don't set that expectation with your team or with your vendors, and, you know, again, they have no idea. And so you could be the one causing problems, even though you feel like they're the ones in the wrong. So, okay, so we're running low on time here, but there's so much to dive into. All of these are probably going to end up being additional parts of the series where we do each one. But now we've taken a look at the first one, which is to define your daily tasks. The next one, define your success, or what success looks like. And then commit to service level agreements. And the next one, you said, this is one that just tickles me pink. I get such a kick out of this one. To answer most questions with a question. Tell me about that.
So this one I think is more specifically related to responding to people that you manage, but it can work elsewhere. And let me give you an example. So again, I used to manage a claims team, and so what would happen very commonly is that they would come to me and they've got a customer on the other end, and they've spent thousands and thousands of dollars. Something has happened. The customer is now upset. And this person's feeling overwhelmed. Like, I'm not here to make thousands and thousands of dollars decisions. That's your job. Here's the call. Do you want it? And so my answer was, what's the customer's question? And there's say, what? So they would tell me the story. And then they're like, my question is, do you want to take the call? And my answer was, do you know what the customer wants? Do they want a return? Do they want their money back? Do they, what is it that they're after? And they were like, this is your job. Why are you asking me these questions? It's important because we had a return policy and they knew the return policy. And so they just didn't want to say no to the customer and said, or maybe on occasion they would actually say, actually, I don't think that the return policy should be applied to them. The following things happen which make them a special case, and I really think we should do something about that. And all of a sudden, that question now has spawned them to actually bring to you to the forefront their actual concern. When you are confronted with these fires that needed to be put out, your employees usually don't have enough of a strategic viewpoint to understand the question that they're actually trying to ask. Instead, they're like, I'm confronted with a situation that I don't understand, and I need you to resolve it for me. And this is how managers end up with so many things to do in so little time. By asking them questions, you refine the focus and you cause them to answer the core question that they actually have for you. This also helps you then to say, what would you do in this circumstance? So you've moved on then, like, okay, well, you don't think that the return policy applies to this customer in this situation. What do you recommend? Yeah. And now all of a sudden, they have to think strategically about that. They have to approach you armed with information. They know you're going to ask them, what is your question? They know that you're going to ask, what is your recommendation? So if you ask them that every time that they approach you, all of a sudden they're not going to just run up to you and be like, hey, do you want a phone call? All of a sudden they're going to maybe be like, okay, wait a minute. Doesn't respond to their return policy. I don't think it's this. And here's my recommendation. And now you can say, you know what? That's a good recommendation. I think we should tweak it slightly. And then I think it does work. Or we can't go that route because of this, and this factor that you weren't aware of and that you've never had really a chance to ask or a reason to ask. But this is why we would do it differently. And now you're starting to understand their level of commitment and understanding to the process that you're engaged in conversing. So by answering or asking them those questions and getting their recommendations, you're training them to take over that activity and to take ownership of that activity And then if you further define it or commit to a service level where they're saying, you know what, as a customer service agent, I'm going to grant you the ability to refund somebody their shipping cost if you feel like it's justified, or something of that nature. And by asking them these questions, they're like, well, I feel like we should give them their shipping money back. Fantastic. Okay, let's go ahead and go forward and do that solution for this customer if you think that can solve it. And now all of a sudden, you're empowering your employees to do more, to accomplish more, and to understand more of what it is that you're doing. So you're training them to become better able to take things off of your plate by doing those things. And you'll see that all of those things work together. If you've defined success, if you've defined your daily tasks, and you've committed to service level agreements, now by asking them these questions, have you already looked on our process guidelines for this activity? If you're asking me how to do this thing and we've already got a process written, my answer is, have you read the return agreement? Have you read this process? Because if the answer is no, well, go read that first.
Yeah.
It's about forcing them to use the tools that are available and asking intelligent questions, approaching it from a manner not like this is beyond my pay grade and I want nothing to do with it, from a manner of instead, this is what the customer's concern is. How do we go and address it in a manner that's best for them and most efficient for them? Because if your customer service team can answer those questions straight out of the gate, or most of them, all of a sudden the amount of questions that you were asked about those activities diminish significantly. And that's how you begin to take control over your own daily timeline.
I love that. Using their own question as a mechanism for training them for solving that in the future, and then empowering them by letting them handle it and see that they had the answer all along. I think that that's brilliant. And I think that that's not only a good solution to, being, in that leadership position faced with that kind of a question, but I think it's also, hello from my cat. I think that it's also a really good way to set yourself up to, really empower people. Like if you want to not just be a manager who is getting stuff done and helping people get tasks done, but you're actually wanting to take care of your people and to have good relationships and have them feel good about what they're doing. I think that that's a really great way to do that. So, okay, we are totally over time here, but it's so worth it, guys. We're finding out some really great stuff, and we're going to dive in deep to these in future little episodes of this series. But let's finish this up. We've got the 5th one coming up now. So the last one I'm going to have you go into, Dennis, because I'm not sure I know what it is.
You really have only one job.
There you go.
As a manager, you really should be focused on one thing. We've talked about your daily tasks. We've talked about all of the other things you need to be doing. But if you're leading people, your primary job is to help them become more efficient. It's a force multiplier. If you're not focused on how to make your team better, more efficient, more knowledgeable, more capable, then you are a bottleneck, and you are the reason why the business is a little bit restricted in some areas. By understanding and coming to terms with the fact that that is probably where the majority of your focus should be, it helps you to prioritize and understand where you should be investing time. And that's why all of the 4 things that I talked about, which are all significant time investments and are skills, they have to be developed. If you don't think about those situations in those terms, it's not going to work very well for you, because you're only going to think about it when you have time. And that's not really the point of this exercise. Create the time. If you don't reach out and grab your time back from you, it's never coming back. And so That's what these questions are, or that's what these activities are designed to do. And again, as a manager, in my strong opinion, your primary purpose is to empower your team to gain back your time. The more efficient and effective they are, you now have 5 people that are more efficient and effective, as opposed to if you focused on just yourself and making yourself more efficient. If you're not going to invest in your people, they're not going to provide you a return on that investment.
Oh, well said. I can't even add to that. So good. I love it.
To me, it helps to redefine your focus. In my opinion, it's too easy to get caught up in what are today's sales. What is today's project? What is a new project I can work on? And those are all important and they can't be overlooked. But if you focus first on how to make your team more effective, you have the ability to increase the time available to spend on those projects, because you can include some of your people on those things, or possibly have them start a new project of their own as you ask them these questions to develop an understanding of how it is that we deal with more complex situations. These are all instructions on how you can invest into the processes that can assist new team members joining a team, on how you can make existing team members more effective, on how to provide better communication tools, and then ultimately on how you coach them up through asking them questions about what questions they have, how they're going to resolve it, and what their potential solutions are that they have. And I'm telling you, if you invest and understand that making them more helpful, more efficient, more useful, and able to create these procedures, all of a sudden you don't have to do this alone. You're not by yourself. You have a team, and they're going to cost you an upfront time investment. Put it in and gain the return. All of a sudden, you can judge how effective they are. You can measure their abilities to assist you. And ultimately, if it's not working, you can make the hard decision and let them go so that you can find someone that will help you.
See, I will just jump in right there too, because I think that that's a really difficult thing that people face. At least for me, I want to make sure that if I'm letting someone go, it's not because of a failure of leadership on my part. Did I give them everything that they needed to be successful? Or did I just leave them flailing and now I'm firing them for it? You don't want to, present them with a lack of tools to be successful and then punish them for it later. So I think that, having these things in place is a really key device that you can use so that you can measure that and you can know, with certainty the choices that you're making are the right ones. And I also think that, the questions I have to come back to this one because I love this so much. Asking questions of your team members, as a manager, you have this impression that you're supposed to have all the answers. And I think that we lose track of the fact that, our people are maybe more capable than we give them credit for, or than we even know, because we're not asking them as many questions. What would you do in this situation? And I think that's a really good one. So,
yeah, I believe that it's a good way to allow them to understand that you want them to continue to grow, and that this is an opportunity then for them to show an understanding and a deeper appreciation for whatever the process is. And again, most of the time they're asking you because you probably already do know the answer to the question. Yeah. And it is, I'm not saying that you always answer with a question. I am saying it almost always that's going to be effective. But if they're asking a question that is outside their pay grade, you should also understand that, right? If it's I'm trying to broker $1 million agreement with, well, maybe that's not for the customer service guy to handle, right? Instead, which department do you think that should go to, right? That's a good question for him. Oh, I thought it would go to you. Oh, actually, it should go to the sales team, professional sales team, and that's who would handle that. Does that make sense? But there's still a question. Anyway, the point is, I believe that it really does help to foster that teamwork. It also presents you with an opportunity then, again, to force them to come to you with answers prepared for common questions. And then secondarily, it also forces them to try to understand, like what the existing processes are. When you've already defined the answer to those questions and you're still getting those questions, it creates an excellent opportunity for you to just reflect it back at them and say, listen, that's what the return policy is for. Did you already look at that? Has this already been examined? Oh, geez, we already have a process for that in place. Have you looked at that?
Yeah.
Instead, they think it's faster to go to you and ask that question. And so maybe that's why you're getting that question instead. And so by asking them that question, you're no longer the easiest resource. They actually have to use the resources on hand. I think it can be a really effective tool.
I love that. I think that you have two different kinds of questions that come to you, or motivations to ask you those questions. And one is you're the easiest answer. And the other is that they don't feel confident that they are allowed to make this decision, or that they will make the right decision. And I think that this is so wonderful. It's such a great mechanism to empower them to start thinking about it. And I love looking at the psychology behind all of this as well, because it's just by asking them, just only that, even if they get the answer wrong or something like that, it means that you care about their opinion in this matter, which already gives them a little bit of confidence. Oh, I didn't know I could have an opinion about this.
It also creates an expectation, does it not?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
An expectation that you expect them to be able to answer this question in the future.
Right.
And that you expect them to continually learn and to understand the processes better. That's a good insight, because that's part of the reason why it works so well, is that it becomes a great communication mechanism between yourself, your vendor, yourself, and your employee.
I love it. One last thing I'm going to circle back and touch on that you said is, there's an upfront investment. And I think we all understand that whenever you have a new hire, you have a team member, that that's going to be an investment of some of your time. I think what's really key about these things that Dennis is talking about today is that this whole system is a big upfront investment. And yet, if you do it, it's not just the investment that you were, originally thinking, well, it's just going to be always time that it takes to manage these people. It's going to be this upfront investment that you could then use for any new hire, right? You're defining these systems, you have these expectations, you have, key, what are they called? Key KPIs?
KPIs, yeah, key performance indicators.
There you go. So that you can measure their progress, so that you can measure and see how are they doing with this task that I've given them. So all of this stuff is, we're just barely scratching the surface on this. There's books and books and books by the dozens that are written about leadership. And there's a lot that, there's even apps and software and all kinds of things that just deal with the key number one for, your daily tasks. So these are all things that are worth diving into. And so this is kind of our 1,000-foot view today that we're going to dive in deep. And I just want to say thank you so much to you guys for watching. Thank you, Dennis, for joining me and sharing your expertise. Is there anything that you want to share with these guys to wrap up, or let them know anything before we go?
I really strongly believe in it. I think that these are things you can begin asking questions about now. And again, to me, it's a skill. When you focus on these 5 things within all of the activities that are happening and all of the responsibilities that are happening within your company, you're going to notice a difference. And as Melissa said, once you've defined them, they're not going to change that frequently. Now you've got tools to buy you additional time. So the time that you invested now is coming back to you in spades, because your employees will be more understanding, because you've defined these things, because you now have a common framework of understanding of how you're going to interact. And if you take the time, and a lot of these things are not a massive time investment the first time you do it. Take a simple process, go through these steps, see if it helps you. If it doesn't, then you haven't wasted too much time, but more importantly, I think you're going to find that it does.
Yeah. Also, if it doesn't help you, I think you're doing it wrong, to be frank. Because I will just say that what you're describing here, all of these steps and these the tools for success here, I think that they go even beyond helping your team and stuff like that. I think what it does is help you create a company culture where they know that their opinion is valid, where they're sharing ideas. And I think that all of this, like, it all kind of works together to create something really special if you're doing it right.
Wow.
And
way to give away the final lecture, right?
Oh. Sorry about that.
That is the purpose. It's about creating an overall approach that is duplicatable, that is understandable. And like I say, it's a framework. It's something that you can bring to bear on any situation that you've got. There's no problem that's undefinable. There is no situation that you can't look back and say, what are the possible outcomes? How do I affect them? And, what does success look like in those scenarios? And anyway, this is if you start exercising this skill and you start applying it wherever you possibly can, your business is going to become a well-oiled machine. Your team will become more efficient, and your time will start being focused on the things that are most important to you and your business. And that's a recipe for success.
Excellent. Okay, guys, we're going to let you go for the day, but I think that next time we have a ton of ideas for future episodes of this. But I think next time, Dennis, if you're up for it, I want to talk about how to get started when you don't know what the process should be.
I think that's wonderful. I would love to. It's a fantastic challenge, and it's something that if you can help somebody create a system out of something they didn't think was systemic, it can be a massive eye opener, and it can really empower them to do a lot of very powerful things.
Excellent. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And maybe we'll even come up with a title for this thing when we go forward. But we've so enjoyed chatting, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed the information that we've shared. Dennis, thanks again. And guys, we'll see you next time. We'll be here every week on Tuesdays at, what time is it Pacific? 11 o'clock Pacific time going forward. Okay, guys, thanks so much. See ya.